Welcome to Mark Noir Detectives. Like, subscribe, and stay with the mystery. Tell me, which part of the world are you watching from?
Chapter 1. The Caller Without a Name. The telephone rang at 11 minutes past 10 on a Tuesday morning, which was an inconsiderate time for anyone to introduce murder into Nero Wolfe's household. Wolfe was behind his desk with his eyes half closed, his fingers resting comfortably on the arms of his chair, and his attention divided between the clock and the prospect of the orchid rooms. At 11, he would take the elevator to the roof and spend 2 hours with Theodore Horstman among the plants. Since the clock was a better conversationalist than most clients, Wolfe had been watching it with approval. I was at my desk, going through the mail. Fritz Brenner was in the kitchen preparing something involving veal, mushrooms, and a sauce Wolfe had criticized before breakfast and would praise at lunch. The old brownstone on West 35th Street had settled into its morning dignity. Then the telephone rang. I picked it up. Nero Wolfe's office, Archie Goodwin speaking. For 2 seconds there was nothing, not even breathing. Then a man said very low, "Is Mr. Wolfe there?" "He is present, occupied, expensive, and listening if I decide you deserve him." "Who is calling?" The answer came as a whisper. "I cannot give my name." That did not improve his chances. Anonymous callers usually wanted one of 3 things: free advice, protection from consequences, or the pleasure of wasting my time. I leaned back and watched Wolfe's right eyelid rise a fraction. "You called us," I said. "That usually means you have something to say." "I am going to be killed." His voice shook on the last word, but not in the ordinary way. It was not the tremble of a man inventing danger to make himself important. Fear had got into his throat and was squeezing. Wolfe opened both eyes. I reached for a pencil. "Who wants to kill you?" "Someone in this house." "What house?" "I cannot tell you." "You can, but you have decided not to. Let us try something easier." "Where are you calling from?" A sound came over the wire, faint but sharp, as if a glass had touched wood. The man breathed in. "They know I found it." "Found what?" "The record. The original record. I thought it had been destroyed, but it was here all the time." Wolfe's lips moved. I knew what he wanted. "What kind of record?" I asked. "A letter? A ledger? A recording?" The man did not answer. Somewhere behind him a clock struck once, followed by a low metallic vibration. It was not a mantel clock. The note was deeper and seemed to linger in the room. Then I heard another sound. 3 quick taps. The caller whispered, "Someone is outside the door. Give me your address." "I cannot." "Then open the door and invite him to kill you at his convenience. You are not giving me much to work with." Wolfe frowned at me, not because the remark was cruel, but because it was untidy. The man's breathing grew louder. "Listen to me. If anything happens, tell Wolfe the green box was not empty." "What green box?" "The one from March." "March of what year?" The 3 taps came again, harder. The man said, "He knows." "Who knows?" "Wolfe." That got my attention. I looked at Wolfe. He was no longer watching the clock. "Have you dealt with us before?" I asked. There was a pause. "Yes." "Then give me your name." "I cannot." "You can whisper it. You seem good at whispering." The door in the caller's room, wherever it was, gave a small creak. I heard it plainly. The man gasped. "I was wrong to call." "You were wrong not to call sooner. Give me the address." "Tell him the voice was enough." The line went dead. I stayed there with the receiver against my ear, listening to the empty hum as though it might apologize and bring him back. Finally, I hung up. Wolfe said, "Well, you heard most of it." "I heard your questions and fragments of his replies. Report." I gave it to him word for word. Wolfe disliked summaries when exact language was available, and my memory has always been one of the tools he rented. With my salary, I included the glass sound, the clock, the tapping, the creak, and the final sentence. When I finished, he closed his eyes. "The voice," he said, That is the part I do not like. You recognized it? I recognized something about it. Not the voice exactly. The way he formed certain words. Which words? Original record. Also the green box. He clipped the end of record, but stretched the word green. I have heard that habit before. Where? If I knew, I would be more cheerful. Wolfe opened his eyes and looked at the clock. It was 10:18. You will remember. That is encouraging. It was intended as an instruction. He pushed the button on the side of his desk. A moment later, Fritz entered. He wore a white apron and the expression of a man who had left something important simmering because civilization required it. You rang, sir? Fritz, did the telephone ring earlier this morning? Fritz considered. At 8:37, Archie had not yet come down. Who called? A man asking whether you accepted consultations. Before noon. What did you tell him? That your office opened at 9, but that Mr. Goodwin handled appointments. Did he give a name? He said he would call again. I sat straighter. What did he sound like? Fritz turned to me. Troubled. Polite but troubled. He spoke very softly. Anything else? Fritz's eyebrows drew together. He had a good ear, especially for voices. A cook who could distinguish 6 kinds of simmer by sound was unlikely to miss a speech habit. He said, I must discuss a private record. He made the word record very short. I looked at Wolfe. Fritz added, there was another thing. He asked whether you still had the green box from the Mercer case. The room changed. Nothing moved. Wolfe remained in his chair. I remained in mine. Fritz stood by the desk. But the quiet was no longer morning quiet. It had acquired weight. I said, what Mercer case? Wolfe's gaze went to me, and I knew at once that he remembered it. Fritz, he said, return to the kitchen. Yes, sir. Fritz left, closing the door behind him. I waited. Wolfe took in a deep breath and let it out slowly. 6 years. Ago Andrew Mercer retained me to determine who was removing confidential papers from his private study. Andrew Mercer? The shipping man? Yes. That surprised me. Mercer had owned a fleet of cargo vessels, 6 warehouses, and enough waterfront property to make newspapers interested whenever he sneezed. He had died 2 years ago, and his estate had produced several months of lawsuits and photographs of unhappy relatives. I was not here for that case, I said. You were in Ohio. I try not to remember Ohio. What was in the green box? Nothing. That sounds simple. It was not. He shifted in his chair. Mercer believed a member of his household was copying business documents. During the inquiry, a small green steel box disappeared from his study. He insisted it contained evidence identifying the thief. 3 days later, the box was found in a linen closet. It was empty. And you never found the evidence? There was none to find. Mercer admitted that he had lied. The box had been empty before it disappeared. Why invent evidence? To frighten the guilty person into an error. Did it work? It produced 2 errors, neither useful. A secretary resigned, and Mercer's younger brother attempted to open my desk while I was in the plant rooms. That sounds useful to me. It was melodrama. The brother was searching for a letter concerning a debt. The secretary resigned, because she had been selling information to a competitor, but not the documents Mercer suspected were being copied. The central question remained unanswered. That was unusual. Wolfe did not enjoy discussing cases that had escaped him. He regarded failure as an indecent object that should be covered with a cloth. Who was the secretary? Laura Bell. And the brother? Simon Mercer. Who else lived in the house? Mercer's wife, Evelyn, his son Philip, his niece, Ruth Carver. A physician named Dr. Amos Keene occupied rooms there for several months while treating Mercer for a heart condition. There were servants. Is the house still standing? Yes. East 72nd Street. I got up and went to the cabinet, where we kept old case files. Wolfe's records were arranged by date, client, and a private system of cross-references that had once made an assistant district attorney accuse me of sorcery. I found the Mercer folder and brought it to my desk. It was thick. On top, was a photograph of Andrew Mercer, square-faced and white-haired, standing beside a library table. Behind him were tall shelves, a stone fireplace, and a clock with a brass pendulum. I looked closer. The clock had a broad black case and a single heavy bell mounted above its face. Could that clock strike with a low metallic note? I asked. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. I turned the photograph toward him. The caller had a clock behind him. One strike at 10:15 unless it was set wrong. The sound hung in the air. That clock strikes the quarter hour once. So our nameless friend may have been in Mercer's house, possibly. I opened the file. You said the caller told Fritz he wanted to discuss a private record. Then he called again and said he had found the original record. He also knew about the green box, which was never in the papers. Correct. So he was connected with the old case. Obviously. Then we have 6 or 7 people to call. Wolfe glanced at the clock. 10:26. You have 34 minutes before the orchids, I said. I am aware of the time. A man says he is about to be killed. Someone enters his room, and the line goes dead. That might justify disturbing the flowers. The flowers are not disturbed by my absence. I am. I started through the file. The household list was on the 3rd page. Andrew Mercer was dead. Evelyn Mercer, his widow, remained at the 72nd Street house. Philip Mercer now managed the family company. Simon Mercer lived in Connecticut. Ruth Carver had married a lawyer named Thomas Vale. Dr. Keene had an office near Park Avenue. Laura Bell's address was 6 years old. I picked up the phone and called the Mercer residence. A woman answered after 4 rings. Mercer residence, May. I speak to Mr. Philip Mercer. He is unavailable. Mrs. Mercer? She is resting. My name is Archie Goodwin. I am calling from Nero Wolfe's office. There was a pause. Not a long one, but long enough to be noticed. What is the matter? That depends. Who am I speaking to? Ruth Vale. I put my hand over the mouthpiece and told Wolfe. He made a small circular motion with one finger, telling me to continue. Mrs. Vale, I said, did a man in your house make a telephone call about 15 minutes ago? Why do you ask? Because he told me someone in the house intended to kill him. Her breath caught, but she recovered quickly. That is absurd. I would like to agree. Who is in the house? My aunt, my cousin Philip, Dr. Keene, Mr. Dennis Crowell, 2 servants, and myself. Who is Dennis Crowell? Philip's business advisor. Is everyone accounted for? What do you mean? Can you see all of them? She did. Not answer at once. Then she said, Mr. Goodwin, this is not a proper subject for a telephone conversation. Murder rarely is. Please check the rooms. I will do nothing of the kind. A man's voice sounded near her, too far from the receiver for me to make out the words. Ruth Vale said, I must end this call. Before you do, ask the man beside you whether the green box was empty. Silence. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then came a click, and the line went dead. I lowered the receiver, Wolfe said. Her reaction? She knew the phrase. Indeed. And she was not alone. Indeed. The telephone rang before I could say more. I answered. This time it was a different voice, strong, controlled, and angry. Is this Archie Goodwin? It has been all morning. My name is Philip Mercer. You just telephoned my house and alarmed my cousin. I did not have to work hard. You told her. Someone here was in danger. That is what someone there told me. You are mistaken. Everyone in this house is perfectly well. Have you counted them? Do not be insolent. That costs extra. Did anyone use a telephone in your house at 10:11? Our calls are none of your concern. Then I will make them the police's concern. That slowed him down. You have no grounds for involving the police. A frightened man, a threat of murder, and a disconnected call make a respectable beginning. Philip Mercer lowered his voice. Listen carefully. My family has had enough scandal. Whatever you think you heard, you will not interfere. Wolfe spoke for the first time, loudly enough to carry. Ask him whether the record has been found, I asked. The result was better than I expected. Philip Mercer said nothing, but I heard his breath leave him. Then, very quietly, he said, "Who? Called you?" "That is what we are trying to learn. You are lying." "I do it better than this." The line went dead again. I looked at Wolfe. The Mercer household has developed an enthusiasm for hanging up. He folded his hands over his middle. "Call Inspector Kramer." That told me how seriously he took it. Wolfe did not summon the police into a matter unless necessity had already taken off its coat and sat down. I dialed headquarters. Kramer was not available, but Sergeant Stebbins was. I gave him the essentials, including the address. He said, "You got a name? Not from the caller. An address? Not directly. So you want us to go charging into a private house because you heard a clock, and because 3 people in that house reacted badly to the words green box and original record. You and Wolfe cooking something. Fritz does the cooking." Stebbins used a word that would not have improved the conversation if repeated. Then he said he would send a patrolman to make an inquiry. I hung up and returned to the Mercer file. At 10:42, Wolfe rose. 6 feet tall and built on generous architectural principles, he moved toward the elevator with his usual economy. "You are going upstairs?" "I am." "A man may already be dead. That possibility will remain whether I neglect my orchids or not. You could at least tell me what you are thinking." He stopped at the elevator and turned. The anonymous caller expected his voice to identify him. Therefore he had spoken to me before, not merely to you or Fritz. Yet I do not recognize him. Maybe 6 years changed it, perhaps. Or perhaps the voice was altered. Then why say it was enough? Because the alteration itself may identify him. The elevator door opened. Before entering, Wolfe added, "Get the names and present circumstances of every person connected with the Mercer case. Also determine whether anyone has recently entered or left the Mercer house. I shall return at 1. The door closed. I had just sat down when the telephone rang for the 3rd time. It was Sergeant Stebbins. His voice had lost its earlier irritation. The patrolman got there. They let him in after an argument. "And? There is a dead man in an upstairs study." I gripped the receiver. "Who?" "Dennis Crowell, Philip Mercer's advisor. Hit on the back of the head with a bronze bookend." "Was there a telephone?" "In the room?" "Yes." "A clock?" "Yes." "What time does it show?" 10:15. It stopped when it fell off the shelf. I looked at the old photograph of Andrew Mercer's study and the black clock standing behind him. Stebbins continued. The receiver was off the hook. Crowell's right hand was still touching it. So he was our caller. Looks that way. It looked that way, but the familiar uneasiness in the back of my mind sharpened instead of fading. "Stebbins," I said, "have someone listen to Crowell's voice." "He is dead, Goodwin." "I know. Ask the people in the house how he spoke. Ask whether he clipped the word record and stretched the word green. What kind of fool question is that? The kind that may save you from arresting the wrong murderer." I hung up before he could improve his vocabulary. Then I sat alone in the office, with the Mercer file open in front of me and the orchid elevator silent behind Wolfe's desk. Dennis Crowell might have been the man who called us. The dead body, the fallen clock, and the receiver under his hand all said he was, but the voice said something else. I had heard it before, and not 6 years ago. I had heard it recently, close enough to remember the rhythm, but not the face. Turned back to the file and began reading from the first page. Somewhere in those old papers was a green box that had contained nothing, a record that had supposedly never existed, and a voice belonging to a man who might still be alive. Chapter 2. A familiar tremor Nero. Wolfe came down from the orchid rooms at 1:01, which meant that the murder of Dennis Crowell had delayed neither his schedule nor the universe. He entered the office, crossed to his chair, and lowered himself into it, with the care of a man placing a valuable object on a tested shelf. I had spent 2 hours with the Mercer file, 3 telephone, directories, 2 newspapers, and my memory. The file had supplied names, addresses, old suspicions, and enough family resentment to furnish a small civil war. My memory had supplied nothing. Wolfe looked at the stack of paper on my desk. Well, Dennis Crowell is dead. Kramer is at the Mercer house. Stebbins says the murder weapon was a bronze bookend shaped like a horse's head. The clock fell at 10:15. The receiver was off the hook, and Crowell's hand was touching it. Those facts were known before I went. Upstairs, they have not become less interesting. Have you identified the voice? I have identified it as the voice I cannot identify. Wolfe made a face. Phooey. An unidentified client is merely an unpaid inconvenience. He may also be a dead inconvenience. Dead men are often more useful than living clients. They cease withholding information. I tossed my pencil onto the desk. You did not hear him. He was frightened. Fear is not identification. It affected the voice, but it did not create it. Underneath the tremor, there was something slow and careful. He pronounced every word as though he had inspected it before letting it out. An educated man? Not necessarily. A cautious man, someone accustomed to being misunderstood or afraid of saying too much. Wolfe closed his eyes. That description could embrace half the lawyers in New York and exclude none of the butlers. I know. Then stop admiring it and make it useful. I went back to the first page of my notes. I had written down the caller's exact sentences. I cannot give my name. Someone in this house. They know I found it. The original record. The green box was not empty. Tell him the voice was enough. I read them aloud, trying to reproduce the slow spacing and the tremor beneath it. On the third sentence, Wolfe's eyes opened. You are exaggerating the fear. I am improving the performance. You are obscuring the rhythm. You do it. I heard only fragments. That gives you an excuse. The door from the hall opened and Fritz came in carrying a tray with coffee for me and beer for Wolfe. Lunch was still 20 minutes away, but Wolfe had apparently authorized a preliminary defense against hunger. Fritz placed the beer on Wolfe's desk and poured my coffee. You are trying to imitate the caller? He asked. I am trying to remember him. Fritz stood with the coffee pot in his hand. The man who telephoned the kitchen. I looked up. What man who telephoned the kitchen? This morning, before breakfast. Wolfe's head turned slowly. Fritz set the pot down. I assumed you knew. It seemed unimportant. Nothing is unimportant after a murder, I said. It merely becomes evidence that was badly timed. Start at the beginning. Fritz glanced at Wolfe. Proceed, Wolfe said. At 7:50, while I was preparing the sausage, the kitchen telephone rang. A man asked whether Mr. Wolfe employed a servant named Thomas Reed. I leaned forward. Those exact words? Yes. He said, Does Mr. Wolfe employ a servant named Thomas Reed? What did you tell him? That no person by that name was employed in this house. Did he ask for me? He asked whether you were Archie Goodwin. I said I was Fritz Brenner. He apologized and ended the call. Wolfe's fingers stopped moving around the beer glass. Describe the voice, he said. Fritz considered carefully. Low. Controlled. The man spoke slowly, as if each word had to be placed correctly. Yet his voice trembled. I sat back. That was him. Fritz nodded. When Archie imitated the sentence about the original record, I recognized the tone. It was exactly the man who called the kitchen. Exactly? Wolfe demanded. The same care in pronunciation, the same fear. I asked, Why did you not mention this when we discussed the later calls? You asked whether the office telephone had rung earlier. I told you about the call at 8:37. You did not ask about the kitchen. That is a defense worthy of a tax lawyer. Fritz ignored me. The first caller did not mention Mr. Mercer or the green box. Did he pronounce Reed as the name, or read as in reading a book? As the name, Thomas Reed. I wrote it down. Wolfe said, Did the caller ask whether Reed was presently employed here, or whether he had ever been employed here? He said, Does Mr. Wolfe employ a servant named Thomas Reed? Present tense. Did he seem relieved by your answer? Fritz's eyes narrowed as he searched his memory. Perhaps. His breathing changed. How? It became quieter. Did you hear anything behind him? A humming sound. Machinery, perhaps. Then a bell. What kind of bell? 2. Short rings. I looked at Wolfe. Not the Mercer clock. That strikes once at the quarter. Possibly not. Anything else, Fritz? The caller coughed before he hung up. A dry cough. He covered the mouthpiece, but not completely. Wood, you recognize the voice again? I believe so. Wolfe lifted the beer and drank. Thank you, Fritz. Fritz picked up the tray, leaving the coffee, and returned to the kitchen. I stared at the name on my pad. Thomas Reed, I said. Ever hear of him? Wolfe did not answer. That means you have. It means I am considering. Consider. Aloud, he put the glass down. During the Mercer inquiry, one of the household servants was named Thomas Reed. I reached for the file and searched the household list. The servants were on a separate sheet, and there he was near the bottom. Thomas Reed, second footman, age 29. You omitted him when you listed the household. I omitted all servants. You also said Fritz's caller asked whether you still had the green box. That was the 8:37 call. So our frightened man called twice before reaching me. First, he called the kitchen asking whether you employed Thomas Reed. Then he called the office and asked about the green box. At 10:11, he called again from the Mercer house, or from a room arranged to look and sound like it. Wolfe grunted. I read farther. Reed left Mercer's. Employment the week after the green box incident. Reason given. Theft of household money. An accusation never proved, Wolfe said. Did you investigate it? Briefly. Mercer refused to discuss it, and Reed disappeared before I could question him. Disappeared? He left his lodging and abandoned his belongings. That seems worth remembering. I remembered it. You merely decided not to share it. The distinction is important. To you. I pulled the service photograph from the back of the file. It showed 7 members of the Mercer staff standing on the rear steps. Reed was in the second row, a lean young man with dark hair, narrow shoulders, and a face that looked older than 29. Beside his name, someone had written in Wolfe's hand, careful speech, slight stammer when pressed. I held up the photograph. There is our familiar tremor. Perhaps you wrote it yourself. I wrote that Thomas Reed stammered under pressure. The caller did not stammer. He controlled it. 6 years can teach a man to place words carefully. Wolfe leaned back. Or another man could imitate him. That stopped me. You think the caller was pretending to be Reed? I think a frightened man telephoned this house to ask whether Thomas Reed was employed here. He later suggested that his voice should identify him. Those two facts are not harmonious. They are if the caller was Reed and wanted to know whether someone had taken his name. Why would he ask whether I employed him? To see whether you remembered him. He asked Fritz, not me. He reached the kitchen by mistake. 3 times. I frowned. The Mercer file contained our old number and it had not changed. A man who had dealt with Wolfe 6 years earlier should have known how to reach the office. The front doorbell rang. I got up, crossed the hall, and opened the door to Inspector Kramer. He came in with his hat shoved back, his face red, and his jaw arranged for trouble. He did not wait for an invitation before marching into the office. Kramer stopped in front of Wolfe's desk. You knew there was going to be a murder. Wolfe regarded him. I knew a man feared one. You sent us there after it happened. We informed Sergeant Stebbins before the body was discovered. By 6 minutes. Then your complaint lacks foundation. Kramer removed his hat and threw it onto the red leather chair. A man calls you, says someone is going to kill him, gets his skull cracked, and you sit here drinking beer. At present I am sitting here without drinking beer. Kramer turned to me. You heard the caller? Yes. Was it Crowell? I do not know. Everyone in the house says Crowell was alone in the upstairs study. The telephone receiver was in his hand. Your number was written on the blotter. That makes him a strong candidate. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Candidate for being the caller. He has already secured the position of corpse. Wolfe said, Did anyone hear Crowell's voice this morning? Kramer faced him again. What kind of game are you playing? One in which precision matters. Did anyone hear him speak? Philip Mercer talked to him at breakfast. Ruth Vale spoke to him around 9:30. Dr. Keene heard him arguing with someone in the library. Did Crowell speak slowly? Sometimes. Did his voice tremble? Not according to them, I asked. Did he clip the word record? Kramer gave me a look. Humor me, I said. You already came all the way downtown. He took a notebook from his pocket, flipped it open and read. Ruth Vale described Crowell's voice as sharp and quick. Philip said he spoke like a machine gun when excited. The housemaid called it high and nasal. That was not our man, I said. Kramer snapped the notebook shut. Maybe fear changed it. Fear changes pitch and breath. It does not turn. A machine gun into a funeral procession, Wolfe said. What was written on the blotter? Our telephone number. Under it, 2 words. Green box. Crowell's handwriting. They say so. Written with what? A fountain pen. Whose? Crowell's. What? Color ink? Kramer's face tightened. He disliked being questioned in Wolfe's office because it sometimes ended with him realizing that he had forgotten to ask the same questions elsewhere. Black. Wolfe opened the Mercer file and removed a letter. Crowell wrote this to Andrew. Mercer, 6 years ago. Blue ink. Archie, examine the later correspondence. I went through it. 4 letters signed by Dennis Crowell, all in blue ink. Kramer said, "People change ink." "Indeed," Wolfe replied. "They also change habits, voices, loyalties, and sometimes identities. That is why evidence must be examined rather than saluted." Kramer planted both hands on Wolfe's desk. Here is evidence. Crowell was hit. Between 10:12 and 10:16, the study door was locked from the inside. The window was closed and latched. The only key was in Crowell's pocket. "A locked room?" I said. Kramer ignored me. The people in the house were together, downstairs except for one servant. Nobody entered or left the study. Wolfe's eyes half closed. Then Crowell struck himself from behind, hid the weapon, restored it to the desk, and died. The bookend was on the floor. Then the explanation is complete. Kramer straightened. "You know what I mean." "Unfortunately," I asked. "Who was the missing servant?" "The butler, Evan Briggs. He says he was in the pantry. Did anyone see him?" "The cook did." "Did you ask about Thomas Reed?" Kramer's head turned. "Who?" I showed him the old staff sheet. "Second footman in the Mercer house 6 years ago," I said. "Accused of theft, disappeared, slight stammer when pressed. A man called here this morning asking whether Wolfe employed him." Kramer took the sheet and read it. "When did you learn this?" "About 4 minutes before you arrived. Convenient. Fritz is a good cook but a poor police bulletin." Kramer looked at Wolfe. "You think Reed is alive?" Wolfe said. "There is insufficient basis for thought. There is a basis for inquiry." Kramer folded the sheet and put it into his pocket. "That belongs to the file," I said. "You can send me a bill." He retrieved his hat and headed for the door. Halfway there he stopped. "One more thing. We found a small green steel box in the study safe." Wolfe's eyes opened fully. "Empty?" he asked. Kramer looked at him. "That is what Philip Mercer claimed." "Did you open it?" "It was already open." "And?" Kramer's mouth twisted. There was a reel of recording wire inside. The office went still. I said, "The original record." "Maybe," Kramer replied. "The laboratory will examine it." Wolfe's voice hardened. "Inspector, that object is central to a matter in which a man has already been killed. See that it is neither damaged nor played carelessly." Kramer put on his hat. "I have solved murders before without instructions. From a man who grows flowers. Your continued employment suggests as much." Kramer left. I went to the window and watched him cross the sidewalk toward his car. New York traffic pushed along 10th Avenue under a pale afternoon sky, horns complaining with more honesty than most witnesses. Behind me, Wolfe said, "Archie," I turned. "Find Thomas Reed. That may take time. You have until dinner." 6 years missing, no known address, and maybe dead. Those are details. I returned to my desk and picked up the telephone. Before dialing, I looked again at Reed's photograph. The thin face, the guarded eyes, and the mouth held tightly as if speech were dangerous. I knew then where I had heard the voice, not from the caller, not from a man standing in front of me. From a recording played 3 months earlier in this office by a private investigator seeking Wolfe's opinion on an unrelated case. The voice on that recording had belonged to a man who called himself Edward Marsh. He had spoken slowly, carefully, and with a tremor he could not quite control. Edward Marsh was alive. He was also, according to the newspapers, scheduled to testify the following morning against Philip Mercer. Chapter 3. The morning inquiry Fritz returned to the office 10 minutes after Inspector Kramer left, carrying the expression of a man who had remembered an ingredient after the dish. Was already on the table. Wolfe was studying the old photograph of Thomas Reed. I was on the telephone trying to locate Edward Marsh, which was proving difficult because private investigators, district attorneys, and frightened witnesses all share a professional affection for disappearing when wanted. Fritz waited until I put down the receiver. "There is more about the first call," he said. I looked at him. "Of course there is." I did not think of it as important at the time. That phrase should be carved above the entrance to police headquarters. Wolfe placed the photograph on his desk. "What more?" Fritz clasped his hands behind his back. The man said he was making an employment inquiry. At first he asked only about Thomas Reed. "You told us that?" I said. "Yes." But he continued. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "With what questions?" He asked how many servants were employed in the house. I told him that such information was private. "Good." Then he asked whether Mr. Goodwin lived here. I sat up. "What exactly did he say?" he asked. "Does Mr. Goodwin sleep in the house every night?" "That is not an employment inquiry." I told him the question was improper. He apologized. Then he asked whether you received visitors before 9 in the morning. Wolfe's fingers pressed against the arms of his chair. "Continue," he said. He asked which entrance tradesmen used. He asked whether the kitchen telephone could be heard in the front hall. He asked whether Mr. Goodwin was usually away during the hours you spent with the orchids. I looked at Wolfe. Our frightened friend was taking measurements. "Verbal measurements," Wolfe said. Fritz nodded. He also asked whether the elevator reached the basement. "It does not," I said. "That is what I told him." "You gave him an answer?" I wished to discover why he was asking. "That makes 2 detectives in the house." Fritz ignored the compliment. When I asked the name of his employer, he said Hollis and Company. I reached for the Manhattan telephone directory. "What kind of company?" He did not say. I ran a finger down the page. There were 3 Hollis companies, one dealing in office furniture, one in insurance, and one in commercial credit. None appeared likely to require an inventory of Nero Wolfe staircases. "What else?" The man asked whether Thomas Reed had ever been permitted to enter the orchid rooms. Wolfe's head lifted. There are many subjects on which Wolfe can remain calm. Insults to his intelligence irritate him. Interruptions during meals offend him. Interference with his orchids enters a darker category. "Repeat that," he said. Fritz did. "Your answer?" I told him Thomas Reed had never been employed here and therefore had never entered the plant rooms. Did he seem surprised? Yes. He was silent for several seconds. Then he asked whether Reed might have used another name. I said, "Such as Edward Marsh." Fritz looked at me. He did not suggest one. Wolfe's gaze moved to the photograph again. "What ended the conversation?" I asked whether he wished to speak to Mr. Goodwin. He said that would be unnecessary because Mr. Goodwin would not remember him. I felt the back of my neck tighten. His exact words, "Mr. Goodwin would not remember me now." Then he coughed, apologized again, and hung up. Wolfe was silent. I said, "That improves the morning. He knew me, knew our household routine, knew about the orchids, knew Reed, and wanted to know when I was away." "Or wished us to believe those things," Wolfe said. He called the kitchen at 7:50. At 8:37, someone called the office asking about the green box. At 10:11, a frightened man called from the Mercer house. "You still think there may be 3 callers?" "I think certainty is an extravagance we cannot yet afford," Fritz said. The first man and the later caller had the same voice. "You heard only my imitation of the later caller," I reminded him. "I heard enough." Wolfe turned to him. "Did the man sound frightened throughout the first conversation?" "Not at first. He was cautious. The trembling began when he asked about the hours Mr. Goodwin was absent." "That suggests the question frightened him," I said. "Or that someone entered the room," Wolfe replied. Fritz considered. There was a change in the background sound. The humming stopped. "What? Humming?" "The machinery I mentioned. It had continued from the beginning. Then it stopped suddenly, and after that, the man's voice became unsteady." "Did you hear another person?" "Not a voice. There may have been breathing near the telephone." Wolfe closed his eyes. I knew the routine. His lips moved slightly, pushing air in and out. Somewhere behind the closed eyes, facts were being placed in rows and told to behave. I said, "The frightened caller at 10 heard someone outside his door. The first caller may have had someone watching him. That makes the calls connected. Obviously. Then, either Edward Marsh called us voluntarily and changed his purpose when someone approached, or he was forced to make the first call." Wolfe opened his eyes. "If forced, why?" "To learn the layout of the house. Why use a man whose voice might be recognized?" "Because the person forcing him did not know we had heard it before." "Yet the caller said his voice would be enough." I frowned. That sentence was becoming more troublesome each time we touched it. Fritz looked from Wolfe to me. "May I return to the kitchen?" Wolfe glanced at the clock. "In a moment." "Did the man ask anything concerning the safe?" "No." "The office?" "He asked whether your desk could be seen from the front hall." I whistled softly. Wolfe's brows rose. "And you omitted that?" I told him it could not. Then I ended the call. "Why?" "Because I no longer believed it was an employment inquiry." That conclusion was available earlier. Fritz accepted the rebuke without moving. "I intended to tell Archie when he came down, but the sausage required attention. Then the second call came and the matter became confused." I said, "The sausage has a strong defense." Wolfe dismissed Fritz with a movement of one finger. Fritz went out, closing the door carefully. I leaned back. "Someone wants to get into this house, possibly. They asked about entrances, my hours, your orchid schedule, the line of sight to your desk, and whether the elevator reaches the basement. That is not curiosity. It is preparation." "For what?" "Burglary. What would they steal?" "The Mercer file. It has been available for 6 years. Not if they thought the original record had been found yesterday." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Explain." "Edward Marsh is scheduled to testify against Philip Mercer tomorrow. Crowell finds the recording wire in the green box. Someone learns that the old file here may contain the key to it. They need to know when I am out and you are upstairs. Why not simply request the file? Because you might refuse." "I would." "That proves their judgment is sound." Wolfe looked at the file on my desk. "What does Marsh intend to testify about?" "That is what I have been trying to learn. The district attorney's office would only say the case involves falsified shipping manifests and insurance claims. Philip Mercer is accused of declaring valuable cargo lost at sea when it had actually been unloaded and sold through a private warehouse. And Marsh? He was an accountant for a freight brokerage connected to Mercer Shipping. According to the newspaper clipping, he kept duplicate transaction records." "The original record," Wolfe murmured. "Maybe. But the wire recording sounds older than Marsh's current case." Wolfe picked up the old household photograph. "Thomas Reed vanished 6 years ago. Edward Marsh appeared 3 years ago, according to the information in your file." "You think Reed became Marsh?" "I think you recognized Marsh's voice as resembling the caller. Resemblance is not identity. We can settle it by finding him." "Do so." I picked up the telephone again and called the office of Assistant District Attorney Leonard Ashe, who was handling the Mercer prosecution. His secretary resisted for 40 seconds before putting him on. Ash had a dry voice, and the habit of sounding as if every conversation had already disappointed him. Goodwin, I cannot discuss a protected witness. You can discuss whether he is alive. Why would he not be? Because Dennis Crowell was murdered this morning, and the man who called us before the murder sounded like your witness. There was silence. Then Ash said, Where did you hear Marsh's voice? 3 months ago. A private investigator named Saul Panzer brought us a recording connected with another matter. That was not entirely true. Saul had brought the recording, but the matter had not been unrelated. At the time, he had been checking whether Marsh's testimony in a commercial fraud suit had been rehearsed. Ash lowered his voice. Marsh failed to report to his protective apartment this morning. What time was he expected? 8. When was he last seen? Last night at 9:20. An officer escorted him from my office. Where is the apartment? I cannot tell. You can tell Kramer after another body is found. Is Wolfe involved? He became involved when someone asked about the hours I leave him unprotected. That got through. Ash said, Marsh was placed in an apartment on West 44th Street. 2 investigators were assigned to him. At 7:30 this morning, one went downstairs for coffee. When he returned, the other investigator was unconscious and Marsh was gone. Was there a struggle? A sedative had been added to a pot of tea. Marsh drugged him. We do not know. Was there a telephone in the apartment? Yes. A humming machine nearby. The building has an old freight elevator. Does it stop humming when it reaches a floor? I suppose so. I covered the mouthpiece and told Wolfe. He nodded once. I returned to Ash. At 7:50, Marsh called our kitchen from that apartment. Someone may have been standing beside him. That is speculation. It is better than losing your witness. Ash took a breath. I am sending men to Wolfe's house. Do not. A crowd of government employees on the sidewalk would spoil the surprise. What surprise? Someone may be planning to enter. You just told me Wolfe was in danger. I told you someone wanted information about the house. That is not the same thing. It is close enough. Call Kramer. He enjoys being close enough. I hung up. Wolfe said, You were unnecessarily provocative. Ash sounded lonely. Marsh was abducted before the first call. It looks that way. He was compelled to ask questions about this house. Yes. Then the person controlling him intended to enter while you were absent, and I was in the plant rooms. Yes. Wolfe looked toward the hall. Yet no attempt was made. Maybe the murder interfered, or the inquiry itself was the attempt. I stared at him. Words cannot open the front door. They can direct attention. I considered the 3 calls. The first had made Fritz think about Thomas Reed. The second had revived the green box. The third had led us to the Mercer house. Each one had moved us farther into the old case. You think they wanted us interested? They wanted something. Interest may have been part of it. The doorbell rang. I reached the hall in 6 strides and opened the door. A man stood on the stoop wearing a grey delivery coat and holding a square parcel wrapped in brown paper. He was narrow-faced, about 40, with a cap pulled low over his forehead. Package for Mr. Wolfe, he said. From whom? Hollis and Company. I kept one hand on the edge of the door. What kind of company is Hollis and Company? He glanced past me toward the office. Commercial records. Put it down. I need a signature. You need better timing. His right hand moved inside the delivery coat. I caught his wrist before it got far, pulled him across the threshold, and introduced his shoulder to the wall. The parcel dropped. Something metallic struck the floor inside it. The man twisted with more skill than a delivery clerk should possess. I drove an elbow into his ribs, got his arm behind him, and pushed him face first against the coat rack. Wolfe's voice came from the office. Archie, do not damage the furniture. The intruder stopped struggling. I reached inside his coat and removed a compact automatic pistol. Then I bent and opened the parcel. It contained no commercial records. Inside was a coil of rope, a roll of adhesive tape, a hypodermic syringe, and a small photograph of the first floor of Wolfe's brownstone. Across the bottom of the photograph, written in black ink, were 4 words: Goodwin leaves at 10. I looked toward the office. Wolfe remained behind his desk, but his eyes had narrowed to slits. The morning inquiry had not been made to learn whether our house could be entered. It had been made to confirm when. Chapter 4. The Man in the Hallway. The man in the delivery coat gave his name as Peter Larkin, which I believed just long enough to write it down before finding 3 identification cards in his wallet, each with a different name and the same photograph. One called him Peter Larkin, one called him George Bell, and the third called him Samuel Kells. That last name stirred something, but it did not immediately ring the bell. I kept his automatic in my pocket, tied his wrists with the rope from his own parcel, and seated him in the yellow chair near the bookshelves. He sat there breathing through his nose and watching Wolfe with the careful resentment of a man who had expected an easy burglary and found himself part of an interview. Wolfe regarded him from behind the desk. "Who sent you?" The man said nothing. "You may answer, Mr. Wolfe," I told him. "He is more patient than I am, but his patience has better lawyers." Still nothing. Wolfe lifted the photograph that had been found in the parcel. It showed the front hall, the stairs, and the edge of the office doorway. Someone had taken it from inside the brownstone. "This photograph was not made today," Wolfe said. "Nor was it made by you. Who entered this house to obtain it?" The prisoner's eyes moved toward the photograph and back. That was enough to tell me he recognized it. I said, "The police will be here shortly. They are already busy with one murder, so they may be annoyed when they learn you brought a pistol, rope, tape, and a needle into a private house." His lips tightened. Wolfe rang for Fritz. When Fritz appeared, Wolfe asked him to telephone Inspector Kramer and request his immediate presence. Fritz nodded and went. The name Samuel Kells was still moving around in my head. It had not found its proper shelf, but it had begun knocking things over. I looked again at the man's false identification. "Samuel Kells," I said. The prisoner's face did not change, but his right shoulder stiffened. Wolfe saw it too. "You know the name," I said. He stared past me. I went to my desk and opened the appointment book. The previous afternoon had been quiet. A woman from Brooklyn had called about a missing bracelet. A lawyer had asked whether Wolfe would examine a disputed will. At 4:20, a young man had arrived with a sealed envelope. I stopped breathing for a second. Walter Kells. The whole scene returned at once. He had stood in the hallway just inside the front door, holding a flat envelope with both hands. He had been around 35, thin, pale, and dressed in a dark suit that needed pressing. Rain had spotted the shoulders of his coat, though the afternoon had been dry. He had asked for Nero Wolfe. I had told him Wolfe did not receive unidentified packages from unidentified messengers. He had replied very slowly, "Mr. Harold Vane instructed me to place this in Mr. Wolfe's hands." There had been a faint whistle between instructed and me. Not a strong one, merely a thin escape of breath caused by a gap in his front teeth. I had heard the same whistle that morning when the frightened caller said original record. I turned to Wolfe. It was not Edward Marsh. His eyes narrowed. "What?" "The voice." "I know where I heard it." I pointed at the hallway. "Yesterday afternoon, a clerk named Walter Kells delivered a sealed envelope from Harold Vane." Wolfe's gaze moved to the safe behind the painting. The envelope was there. I had given it to him after the messenger left. Wolfe had examined the outside, seen no appointment and no explanatory note, and ordered me to place it in the safe until the sender identified his purpose. "You heard Kells speak?" Wolfe asked. "Hardly 20 words, but he spoke slowly, and there was a faint whistle between certain words." The caller had it too. "Why did you not remember earlier?" "Because I was looking 6 years backward instead of 1 day." Wolfe's mouth tightened. He disliked a fact that had been in his house all night without permission to become important. Describe him. Thin, nervous, brown hair, gray eyes, dark suit. He kept looking toward the stairs. The photograph. I did not see him take one. Could he have? He was alone in the hall for perhaps 15 seconds while I came in here to ask whether you would receive him. Wolfe glanced toward the bound intruder. Is that photograph the work of Walter Kells? The man in the chair remained silent. I stepped closer. You chose Samuel Kells as one of your false names. That was not an accident. Is Walter your brother? His eyes shifted to me. Cousin. Nothing. Or is Samuel the name Walter used? When he hired you, the prisoner spoke at last. I do not know any Walter Kells. His voice was rough and ordinary. It did not resemble the caller's. I smiled at him. You should have remained silent. You were more convincing. The doorbell rang. It was not Kramer. A uniformed patrolman had arrived with an investigator from the district attorney's office sent by Leonard Ashe. I gave them the intruder, his pistol, the syringe, and the contents of the parcel. The investigator objected when I refused to surrender the photograph. It is evidence, he said. It is also a picture of our house. That makes it evidence. That makes it ours until Kramer gets here. He started to argue, but the prisoner chose that moment to kick at the patrolman. The discussion became physical, and they took him away without the photograph. I returned to the office and went to the safe. Wolfe watched while I opened it and removed the envelope Walter Kells had delivered. It was cream-colored, sealed with red wax, and addressed in black ink. Nero Wolfe Personal and Urgentin. The lower left corner was the name Harold Vane. I placed it on Wolfe's desk. You did not open it yesterday, I said. Mr. Vane had not engaged my services. Someone has now tried to break into the house for it. That may constitute an introduction. He examined the seal, then used the ivory paper knife. Inside were 12 folded sheets and a short typed note. Wolfe read the note first. His eyes moved down the page, returned to the top, and moved down again. Well? I asked. He handed it to me. Mr. Wolfe. The enclosed records were copied from the private accounts of Vane and Mercer Holdings. They proved that Harold Vane diverted partnership funds through false shipping contracts and concealed the withdrawals under the names of dead employees. I cannot safely take them to the police. Mr. Vane suspects that I made copies. If he learns where they have been placed, he will destroy them and me. I will telephone tomorrow morning. Walter Kells. I looked at Wolfe. Vane and Mercer Holdings. Indeed. So Harold Vane is connected with Philip Mercer. Apparently, I examined the enclosed sheets. They were columns of dates, account numbers, warehouse charges, and payments routed through companies with names designed to put an accountant to sleep. Several entries were marked with initials. One set appeared repeatedly. T.R. Thomas Reed, I said, or another name with those initials. Walter Kells knew about Reed. Maybe Vane used Reed's identity in the false accounts. Wolfe took one of the sheets. The note states that funds were concealed under the names of dead employees. Reed may be dead, or Vane believed him to be. I picked up the telephone directory and found Harold Vane's office on Broad Street. He was listed as president of Vane Commercial Trust and a director of Mercer Shipping. I called. A woman answered. Mr. Vane's office. This is Archie Goodwin of Nero Wolfe's office. I want to speak to Mr. Vane. May I ask the nature of your call? You may, but you will still have to ask him. She tried 2 more barriers. I went through them. Finally, Harold Vane came on the line. His voice was deep, polished, and irritated. Mr. Goodwin, I am in a meeting. You sent a man named Walter Kells to our office yesterday. I did nothing of the kind. That is interesting. He brought an envelope with your name on it. There was a pause. What was in the envelope? You first. I employ a Walter Kells as a junior accounts clerk. If he used my name without authority, that is a serious matter. Where is he? He failed to report for work this morning. Have you notified the police? An absent clerk is not necessarily a police matter. It becomes one when he telephones to say someone intends to kill him. Another pause, longer this time. Vane said, You are mistaken. That sentence has been popular today. What exactly did Kells tell you? that he was inside a house with someone who intended to kill him. Which house? He hung up before giving the address. Vane's tone sharpened. Then you have no reason to connect the call with my employee. I recognized his voice. That is impossible. Why? Kells cannot use a telephone. I looked at Wolfe. He had heard. Explain that, I said. Kells has a severe hearing defect. He can understand a person facing him, but telephone speech is difficult for him. He avoids calls whenever possible. He made one yesterday? I have never known him to do so. Where did he work? On the 7th floor. Doing what? Routine ledger preparation. Did he have access to your private accounts? Certainly not. Then you will not mind if we show the police the records he brought us. Vane's voice lost its polish. What records? The ones proving you stole thousands from your business partner. The silence that followed was not empty. I could hear him thinking through the wire, and he was thinking fast. Then he said, "Do not leave your office. That sounds like advice. It is an instruction. I will be there within the hour." He hung up. I cradled the receiver. He denied sending Kells, claimed Kells could not use a telephone, and ordered us to stay home. "Mr. Vane is accustomed to obedience," Wolfe said. "I could go to him and save cab fare. You will not." "Why?" "Because he is coming here." "That has not always stopped you from sending me out." Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. "Mr. Vane wishes to recover those papers. He may offer money, threats, or a lie. I prefer to inspect all three in comfort." I put the records back into their envelope, but Wolfe told me to leave them on his desk. "Call Saul Panzer," he said. "Have him find Walter Kells. Tell him to begin with Vane's office, Kells's residence, and the route between them." "What about Edward Marsh?" "Continue that inquiry through Fred Durkin. The resemblance between Marsh's recorded voice and the callers may have been coincidence, but coincidence is merely an unexplained fact." I made the calls. Saul answered on the second ring and took the assignment without wasting words. Fred grumbled because he was eating lunch, but agreed after I reminded him that food tasted better when billed as an expense. At 2:20, I put on my coat. Wolfe opened his eyes. "You were told not to leave." By Harold Vane. I am not on his payroll. "Where are you going?" "To Vane's office. You spoke to him 4 minutes ago." "I spoke to a voice. I want the office." Wolfe frowned. "Do not be theatrical." "I will be observational," he grunted, which I accepted as permission. Broad Street in the afternoon had the air of a place where men hurried to lose other people's money before the banks closed. Vane Commercial Trust occupied 2 floors of a stone building that had been designed to reassure depositors and discourage daylight. The receptionist recognized my name and tried to stop me. "Mr. Vane has left for an appointment with Nero." "Wolfe?" She hesitated. I did not wait. I crossed the reception room, pushed through a gate, and followed the corridor toward the private offices. Walter Kells's desk was easy to find because it was the only one being searched by 2 men in shirt sleeves. One was emptying drawers. The other was feeding papers into a metal wastebasket and setting them alight. I entered. Office cleaning has become dramatic. The man by the fire grabbed for a folder. I took it first. The label read, "Mercer Adjustment Accounts." The other man stepped toward me. He was heavy with flat ears and a broken nose. I showed him the outline of the pistol in my pocket without taking it out. "Let us keep this financial." He stopped. I opened the folder. Several pages had been removed, but one remained. It listed payments to Thomas Reed over the previous 5 years. That was odd enough, since Reed had vanished 6 years earlier. At the bottom, in Walter Kells's handwriting, was a note: "Reed payments transferred to HV private account. Original proof held by DCDC could stand for Dennis Crowell." I folded the page and put it inside my coat. "Where is Kells?" Neither answered. The heavy man said, "You are trespassing, then call the police." He did not. I left them with the burning papers and took the stairs instead of the elevator. On the 6th floor landing, I heard a faint sound from the hallway below. It was not a voice. It was a dry, careful whistle between breaths. I went down, quietly. A man stood at the far end of the fifth-floor corridor, half concealed beside a service door. He was thin, pale, and wearing the same dark suit I had seen the previous afternoon, Walter Kells. He saw me and raised one finger to his lips. Then a hand appeared from behind the service door, seized his collar, and pulled him backward into darkness. 2. Door slammed. By the time I reached it, the lock had clicked. From the other side came one muffled sentence, spoken slowly through fear. Tell Wolfe the record name's the wrong man. Chapter 5. A dead man's warning. Inspector Kramer arrived at the brownstone shortly after 6, carrying the kind of news that makes dinner either impossible or urgently necessary, depending on whether you are Nero Wolfe or anybody else. Fritz had just announced that the first course would be served in 12 minutes. Wolfe was behind his desk with the financial sheets from Walter Kells's envelope arranged before him. Harold Vane had not appeared, though he had promised to come within the hour. Men who issue commands over the telephone often discover urgent reasons to avoid the place where obedience was expected. I had returned from Broad Street with a bruised shoulder, a torn cuff, and the page from the Mercer adjustment file. I had also returned without Walter Kells. The service door on the 5th floor had opened into a narrow stairway descending to an alley behind the building. By the time I forced the lock, the man I had seen was gone. I searched the stairs, the alley, 2 adjoining basements, and a delivery garage. I found a grey felt hat, a broken spectacle lens, and a trace of blood on the railing. None of them spoke. Kramer entered the office without waiting for an invitation. Sergeant Stebbins followed. Him shut the door and remained near it. Kramer looked at me first. You saw Walter Kells this afternoon? I saw a man I believed was Walter Kells. Believed? He looked like the clerk who delivered the envelope yesterday. Did he speak? 1 sentence. What sentence? I repeated it. Tell Wolfe the record name's the wrong man. Kramer's mouth hardened. You are certain? That is why I repeated it exactly. You followed him? I tried. Someone pulled him through a service door. And you lost him. I did not misplace him deliberately. Kramer turned to Wolfe. You heard this? From Mr. Goodwin. And you believe it? Wolfe regarded him. Archie sometimes embellishes his descriptions. He does not invent witnesses. Kramer removed his hat and placed it on the red leather chair. He did not sit. The police found Walter Kells at 5:20 this afternoon in a rented room on West 48th Street. I waited. Kramer looked directly at me. He was dead. The office became quiet enough for the ticking of the wall clock to sound intrusive. I said, When? The medical examiner puts death between 5 and 7 this morning. That sentence needed a second hearing, but Kramer did not repeat it. I glanced at Wolfe. His face had not changed. The caller reached us at 10:11, I said. I can read a clock. And I saw Kells after 3. You saw somebody. He had Kells's face. So do photographs. I stood up. Are you suggesting I chased a photograph down 5 flights of stairs? I am suggesting you made a mistake. Then the mistake wore Kells's suit and knew what was in the green box. Kramer took a folded paper from his pocket and placed it on Wolfe's desk. It was a police photograph of the dead man. The room in the picture was narrow and shabby. Kells lay on the floor beside a bed, one arm beneath him, his pale face turned toward the camera. Even with the stiffness of death and the bad light, I recognized him. The narrow jaw, the small ears, the deep line beside the mouth. It was the clerk who had delivered the envelope. It was also the man I had seen in the hallway. Wolfe looked at the photograph without touching it. Cause? He asked. A blow behind the right ear. Heavy, blunt object. Probably killed immediately. Any sign of restraint? Bruising on the wrists, adhesive residue on the mouth. Then he had been held before he was killed. Possibly, certainly. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Do not start telling me how to conduct an investigation. I am telling you how to use a noun. Stebbins shifted his weight near the door. He had learned that interrupting Wolfe and Kramer only prolonged their conversations. I picked up the photograph. Where was the room? Third floor of a lodging house, rented yesterday afternoon under the name Edward Marsh. That got my attention. The witness against Philip Mercer. The landlady described the renter as a thin man with dark hair. She saw him only once. The signature is being compared. Was Marsh there? We do not know. What was found in the room? Kells's wallet empty, a burned envelope, 2 drinking glasses, a length of wire, a newspaper with tomorrow's court schedule marked. Telephone. Downstairs in the hall. So Kells could not have called us from the room even if he had been alive. Kramer's jaw moved. The call did not come from the room. Have you traced it? It came through a public exchange. The operator connected it from a private switchboard. Which switchboard? The Mercer residence. That confirmed what the clock had suggested. I said, then someone inside the Mercer house imitated Kells. Or you never heard Kells, clearly enough to know his voice. I heard him yesterday, for 20 words. And again in the hallway. You saw a man in poor light after spending hours looking for Kells and heard one sentence through a closed corridor. The door was open when he spoke. Goodwin, men identify strangers every day because they expect to see them. Then, they swear in court and ruin somebody's life. I stepped toward him. You came here to ask questions or give a lecture. Wolfe said, Archie. That was enough to stop me, but not enough to improve my disposition. Kramer turned to Wolfe. The obvious conclusion is that Goodwin was mistaken. The caller was not Kells. The man in the hallway was not Kells. Kells died before either event. Obvious conclusions, Wolfe said, are frequently the refuge of tired policemen. Kramer's face reddened. You have a better one? Yes. Let us hear it. Someone wanted Archie to recognize Walter Kells. Kramer stared at him. Wolfe leaned back, placing his hands on the chair arms. The caller spoke slowly, with a tremor and a faint whistle. Those were the features Archie remembered from Kells's brief visit. This afternoon, a man resembling Kells appeared where Archie was certain to see him, delivered a cryptic warning, and was removed before close inspection could occur. Now Kells is found dead, killed hours before both incidents. So Archie was fooled, deliberately. That is the same thing. It is not remotely the same thing. An error is accidental. A deception has purpose. Kramer took a cigar from his pocket, examined it, and put it back without lighting it. What purpose? To direct us toward a dead man who could neither answer questions nor contradict false evidence. Why direct you toward Kells at all? Because the papers in that envelope require an author. Kramer glanced at the financial sheets. You opened them? The arc seal was addressed to me. Convenient again. I said, convenience is having a busy day. Wolfe continued. The note accuses Harold Vane of stealing partnership funds and states that Walter Kells copied the records. If Kells was already dead when the envelope arrived yesterday afternoon, someone else delivered it in his name. Kramer looked at me. Was the dead man the same man who came here? That is what I thought when I saw the photograph. You just said the man in the hallway had his face. He did. But the messenger? I went back over the previous afternoon in my mind. The messenger had been nervous and kept his chin lowered. His coat collar had been raised. I had seen his face, but only from the front hall, with afternoon light behind him. The resemblance was strong, I said. I did not inspect his teeth. The whistle could have been produced intentionally, Wolfe said. Kramer frowned. Anybody can whistle between words? Not gracefully, but yes. I looked again at the police photograph. The dead man's lips were parted slightly. One upper tooth was missing near the center. That could make the sound naturally. Indeed, Wolfe said, which is why an imitator would include it. Kramer picked up Walter Kells's typed note and read it. You think somebody killed Kells, copied his manner of speech, disguised himself as Kells, delivered these papers, made the telephone call, and appeared at Vane's office. Not necessarily one person, Wolfe said. That is a great deal of theatre. Murderers are often theatrical when a simple lie cannot survive examination. Kramer slapped the note onto the desk. There is a simpler explanation. Kells prepared the papers before he died. Someone found them and delivered them. The caller knew Kells and imitated him. The man Goodwin saw was another mistake. 3 independent coincidences? Wolfe's tone was dry. You are extravagant, sir. Stebbins spoke from the door. There was something else in the room. Kramer turned his head. I was getting to it. You were taking the scenic route, I said. Stebbins ignored. Me. We found a portable wire recorder under the bed. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. The same type of recording wire found in the Mercer green box, he asked. Close, Stebbins said. Different manufacturer. The laboratory is checking. Was there a spool mounted? Yes, partly erased, partly. The first few minutes had sound, then static. What sound? Stebbins looked at Kramer. Kramer nodded reluctantly. A man's voice, Stebbins said. He says the same words Goodwin reported from the call. My skin tightened. All of them? Most. I cannot give my name. Someone in this house. The original record. The green box was not empty, Kramer added. The recording may have been used during the telephone call. I sat down slowly. A recorded voice explained the careful pacing. It explained why the caller's words had sounded inspected before release. It also explained the abrupt gaps between answers, but it did not explain everything. I asked questions, I said. The responses fitted them. Some did, Wolfe replied. Others merely appeared to. I took my notes and read the exchange again. Who wants to kill you? Someone in this house. What kind of record? The original record. Give me your address. I cannot. The phrases could have been selected from a recording and played in response to my questions. The pauses had not been hesitation. They had been someone choosing the proper segment. The frightened caller was not speaking live, I said. Some sounds were live, Wolfe said. The taps at the door, the falling object, the clock, and perhaps the breathing. Then someone sat by a recorder in the Mercer house and built a conversation out of Kells's voice, or a close imitation of it. Stebbins said, The laboratory man thinks the voice on the spool may be Kells. There are several unused sentences, as if somebody made him repeat lines. Kramer's expression darkened. He may have been forced to make the recording before he was killed. That would explain the bruised wrists, I said. Wolfe shook his head slightly. Not completely. Kramer glared. What is wrong with it? The caller said. Tell him the voice was enough. That phrase was not intended for Archie. It was intended for me. You were in the room. But the caller could not know that unless he or his accomplice had information about our routine. The morning employment check, I said. Indeed. They asked whether I received visitors before 9, whether Archie lived here when he was absent, and whether the kitchen telephone could be heard from the front hall. The inquiry was not solely preparation for entry. It was also preparation for performance. Kramer frowned. Meaning? They needed to know who would answer each telephone and whether Archie would be present when the recorded voice was played. I said, the first call tested Fritz. The second tested whether Wolfe remembered the green box. The third was staged for me because I had heard Kells the day before. Wolfe inclined his head 1/8 of an inch. Kramer paced once across the eye. Office and back. Then why murder Crowell? Because Crowell possessed the original record, Wolfe said. The wire in the green box? Perhaps, or knowledge of what it contained. Kramer stopped. The laboratory played the wire. Wolfe became motionless. And? Most of it is business dictation from 6 years ago. Andrew Mercer describing cargo accounts. Near the end, there is an argument. Between whom? Mercer. And an unidentified man. What is said? Kramer opened his notebook. The unidentified man accuses Mercer of using Thomas Reed's name to hide withdrawals. Mercer says Reed is dead and cannot object. The other man says Reed is alive and has copies. Then the recording ends. I looked at the adjustment page in my pocket. Payments to Thomas Reed had continued for 5 years. Harold Vane's private account had received the transfers. Dennis Crowell held the original proof. "The wrong man," I said. Kramer turned to me. "The warning in the hallway. The record names the wrong man." Maybe Thomas Reed was not the thief. His name was used after he disappeared. Wolfe looked at the financial sheets, or the initials TR do not signify Thomas Reed. Kramer said, "You are guessing." "Certainly. Guessing is useful when labeled correctly." The doorbell rang. Stebbins opened the office door and stepped into the hall. A moment later, he returned with Saul Panzer. Saul was medium-sized, quiet, and so ordinary in appearance that strangers forgot him while still looking at him. He nodded to Kramer, then handed me a small paper bag. "I found this in Walter Kells's apartment," he said. Kramer exploded. "You entered a police scene." Saul looked mildly surprised. "The police had not found the apartment when I entered. That does not improve it." It improved my chances of finding something. I opened the bag. Inside was a dental plate holding one false upper tooth. Saul said, "Kells wore that plate. His landlady saw him remove it when the gum bothered him. Without it, he whistled on certain sounds." I glanced at the police photograph. The gap in Kells's teeth had not been natural. It appeared only when the plate was removed. Wolfe said, "When was he last seen wearing it?" "Yesterday morning. The landlady says he never went out without it because he was ashamed of the gap." "Was the plate found in his room?" "In a glass beside the sink. I placed it on Wolfe's desk." That settled one point. The nervous clerk who came to the brownstone had whistled between words. If the real Walter Kells had been wearing his dental plate when he left home, the messenger had either removed it later or had never been Kells. Kramer saw the conclusion. At the same time I did. "Someone studied him," he said. "Closely," Wolfe replied. "His appearance, his speech, his nervous manner, even a defect he ordinarily concealed." Kramer picked up the plate and examined it. Who could do that? An associate, an employer, a person who had kept him under observation. Harold Vane? Possibly. Philip Mercer? Possibly. You are generous with possibilities. Because you have not yet brought me facts. Kramer's hand tightened around the dental plate. Here is one. Harold Vane never reached this house because his car was found abandoned near Washington Square at 4:30. There was blood on the rear seat. I said, "His blood? We do not know." "Where is Vane?" "We do not know." Wolfe shut his eyes. Kramer continued. Philip Mercer claims Vane telephoned him at 4:10 and said he was going to recover stolen papers from Nero Wolfe. That put a pleasant label on us. Mercer also says Vane accused Dennis Crowell of blackmail. Wolfe opened his eyes. Did Vane identify what Crowell possessed? The original partnership accounts, not the recording wire. Mercer says nothing about a recording. Then someone has supplied different people with different versions of the same object. Kramer leaned over the desk. You are going to turn over every paper Kells brought here. No. They are evidence in 2 murders. They are also bait, Kramer straightened. For whom? For the person who has already sent one armed man into my house and may send another. You intend to keep them here? I intend others to believe they remain here. Kramer gave him a long stare. Then he looked at me. Goodwin, when Wolfe gets you killed, do not expect me to apologize at the funeral. I will arrange to be absent. Kramer put on his hat. Stebbins opened the door. Before leaving, Kramer said, The body of Walter Kells will be formally identified tonight. After that, I am releasing his name to the newspapers. Wolfe's gaze remained fixed on the financial records. Delay it. Why? Because, at present, the murderer does not know whether we have discovered that the caller was a dead man. Kramer stopped. Wolfe continued. Let him believe his performance succeeded. Let him believe Archie identified Walter Kells, that we accept Kells as the caller, and that we possess the original record. You want another attempt on the house. I want the person responsible to act before he has time to devise a Better lie. Kramer considered it, disliked it, and could not dismiss it. 12 hours, he said. Then Kells's identity is released. He and Stebbins left. Saul remained by the bookshelves. Wolfe pressed the button for Fritz. When Fritz appeared, Wolfe informed him that dinner would be delayed 20 minutes. Fritz's face showed that murder had finally crossed a serious boundary. 20 minutes, he repeated. Regrettably, Fritz went out with the dignity of a statesman whose government had fallen. I looked at Wolfe. What are we doing? Dining. After that, we shall arrange for the financial papers to be removed from the safe. Where will they go? Nowhere. Archie, you will make a conspicuous show of carrying an envelope from the office to your room. Saul will leave by the front door with an empty briefcase. Fritz will telephone a number that can be overheard from the hall and state that the original record is no longer in my possession. That should confuse anyone listening. It should clarify who is listening. I picked up Walter Kells's dental plate and turned it in my hand. A dead clerk had been forced to record a warning. A living man had worn his face. Someone had used both the recording and the disguise to place Kells at the center of the case after he was already dead. The trick was clever, but it had one weakness. The murderer had worked too hard to make us recognize Walter Kells. That meant the person we were meant to ignore was someone else. Chapter 6. 3 Voices in One. Office. Harold Vane arrived at the brownstone the next afternoon with a bandage above his left ear, a dark suit that had survived a bad night, and a lawyer whom I left on the stoop, Vane objected. My attorney accompanies me. Not into Mr. Wolfe's office. He advised me not to answer questions without him. That should shorten the visit. The lawyer began telling me about constitutional rights. I told him the Constitution did not require Nero Wolfe to provide him with a chair. Vane finally entered alone, partly because he wanted the financial records, and partly because men like Harold Vane hate being excluded from rooms where other people may be discussing their money. He was broad-shouldered, silver-haired and handsome in the expensive way achieved by tailors, barbers, and a lifetime of expecting doors to open. The bandage damaged the effect, but did not destroy it. Samuel Briggs arrived 9 minutes later. He was Vane's business partner, though the word partner covered a relationship that appeared to consist chiefly of mutual suspicion. Briggs was short and square, with a heavy chin and a voice that sounded as if it had been scraped on gravel. He carried no lawyer, but he carried enough anger to fill the empty chair. Owen Pike came last. Pike was the company accountant. He was thin, careful, and dressed in brown. His pale hands remained folded over the handle of his briefcase, and his eyes moved constantly without seeming to settle anywhere. If Vane looked like a man who owned a bank, Pike looked like the man who knew which drawer contained the bank's real books. Wolfe had arranged them in a row before his desk. Vane took the red leather chair. Briggs sat in the yellow one. Pike occupied the straight-backed chair between them. I remained at my desk, with my notebook open and the telephone within reach. Saul Panzer was in the kitchen with Fritz. Fred Durkin was across the street in a parked car. Inspector Kramer had refused to attend because, as he put it, he did not take invitations from suspects. He had nevertheless stationed Sergeant Stebbins in a car half a block away. Wolfe surveyed the 3 men. Mr. Vane, your disappearance. Yesterday was inconvenient. Vane's jaw tightened. I did not disappear. I was attacked. Where? In my automobile. By whom? I do not know. Yet you declined police protection after regaining consciousness. I had reasons. Name one. Vane glanced at the other 2 men. I did not trust the police to keep private business matters private. Briggs gave a harsh laugh. You mean you did not trust them to overlook your theft? Vane turned on him. You have been repeating that lie for 2 years. It became a fact when Kells copied the books. Owen Pike's breathing changed. It was slight, only a pause before the next breath. But Wolfe noticed it. I saw his eyes, move to Pike and remain there for an instant. Wolfe said, Mr. Briggs, When did you last see Walter Kells alive? Monday afternoon. He brought me a quarterly account. Did he seem frightened? He always seemed frightened. Vane treated? Clerks like rented pencils. Vane's face hardened. Kells worked for the company, not for me personally. He worked in your private accounts office, Briggs replied. He performed routine entries. Then how did he discover payments routed into your private account? Vane leaned forward. Those records are false, Wolfe said. You have not seen them. I know what they contain. That produced silence. Vane realized it too late. Wolfe's lips moved slightly. How? Vane looked at me, then Briggs, then Pike. Goodwin described them on the telephone. I said they showed that you had stolen thousands from your partner, I told him. I did not mention routed payments. Briggs turned toward Vane with satisfaction. Vane recovered quickly. Dennis Crowell had threatened me with forged accounts. I assumed they were the same. Crowell threatened you? Wolfe asked. He demanded $50,000. For what? To keep quiet about alleged irregularities in the Mercer shipping contracts. Did you pay him? Certainly not. Samuel Briggs laughed again. That means he tried to bargain him down. Wolfe shifted his attention to Briggs. Your own position is curious, sir. The stolen money belonged partly to you, yet you did not report your suspicions to the police. I lacked proof. You had Walter Kells. I had a frightened clerk who changed his story whenever Vane entered the room. Did you ask him to copy the private books? Briggs hesitated. Wolfe waited. I told him to watch the accounts. That is not an answer. I told him to copy anything unusual. Without Mr. Vane's knowledge? Obviously. So Mr. Kells served two masters. He served the company. He is dead. Briggs's mouth closed. Wolfe turned. To Owen Pike. You supervise Mr. Kells? Yes. Pike's voice was soft and precise. Each word came separately, as if he feared one might contaminate the next. Did he have access to the Vane and Mercer Holdings accounts? Limited access. Could he have copied them? I suppose so. Did he? I do not know. You are the chief accountant, yet you do not know whether a junior clerk removed private financial records. Pike swallowed. The department handles thousands of pages. There was a faint passage of air between thousands and of. Not quite a whistle, but close. I looked at Wolfe. He was watching Pike's chest. Do you know Thomas Reed? Wolfe asked. Pike's breathing stopped for nearly 3 seconds. Then he said, I have heard the name during this inquiry. Before this inquiry. I cannot recall. Try. I do not believe so. Do you know Edward Marsh? No. Dennis Crowell. By reputation. Walter Kells? Of course. Can you imitate his voice? Pike's head jerked up. Briggs turned to stare at him. Vane did not move. Pike said, That is an extraordinary question. Most useful questions are ordinary. Answer it. I cannot imitate anyone. Wolfe leaned back. Mr. Vane? I cannot. Mr. Briggs? Briggs snorted. I have better uses for my time. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. He had spent the first 20 minutes asking questions whose answers were either denials or insults. But the answers were not what interested him. He was listening to the spaces between them, the breaths before names, the care given to particular words. He asked Vane to say original record. Vane refused. Wolfe asked Briggs. Briggs said it loudly and badly. When Wolfe asked Pike, the accountant stared at him. This is childish. Then humor me, Pike said. Original record. He clipped the final syllable of record. My fingers tightened around the pencil. Wolfe's eyes remained half closed. Again, he said. Pike repeated it, this time more naturally. The first pronunciation had been deliberate, or the second one was. Vane said, I did not come here for a speech exercise. I came to recover stolen company property. The papers were addressed to me, Wolfe said. They were taken from my office. Then you may sue me. I may do more than that. Briggs looked pleased. Threatening Wolfe in his own house is almost worth the trip. Vane ignored him. Kells was mentally unstable. He fabricated evidence, stole records, and attempted to blackmail me. A dead clerk is wonderfully convenient, I said. Vane turned to me. You claim he telephoned you after he was dead. I claim someone used his voice. That is absurd. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Why? Because voices cannot be stolen. The recording device found in the room suggests otherwise. Vane's face changed slightly. He had known about the papers. He had known about the routed payments. But the portable wire recorder had not been mentioned publicly. Wolfe saw it. How did you learn of the recorder? He asked. I did not. You reacted to it. I reacted to your accusation. I made none. Samuel Briggs leaned toward. Vane. You knew Kells was being recorded. Be quiet. You knew because you arranged it. Vane rose. I left my desk and moved between him and the door. Sit down. You cannot hold me here. That depends on how much exercise you want. He looked at Wolfe. Wolfe said, Remain seated, sir. Your departure now would be interpreted by everyone present according to his preference, and none would favor you. Vane returned to the chair. The telephone rang. It was the instrument on the table in the front room, not the one on my desk. All three visitors turned their heads toward the hall. Wolfe looked at me. Answer it. I crossed the hall into the front room. The telephone stood on a small table beside the window. We rarely used it, and only a handful of people knew its number. I lifted the receiver. Archie Goodwin. For a second there was silence. Then the frightened voice said, You must abandon the case. My grip tightened. It was the same low tremor, the same slow placement of words. A faint whistle slipped between must and abandon. I looked through the open doorway. Vane, Briggs, and Pike were still seated before Wolfe. I could see all three clearly. Who is this? I asked. You have been warned. Walter Kells is dead. A breath entered the receiver. Then the voice said, More men will die. Which men? The record is false. What part? The name. Whose name? The voice hesitated. Behind. Yet I heard a faint scrape and 2 metallic taps. Then came the words, Ask Wolfe who was in the hallway. The line went dead. I remained with the receiver at my ear for a second, then returned to the office. Wolfe had not moved. The 3 men were watching me. Well? Vane demanded. I sat at my desk. The caller advises us to abandon the case. Briggs's eyebrows rose. The same voice? Yes. Pike's hands tightened around his briefcase. Wolfe asked, Exact words. I reported the exchange, including the scrape and the 2 taps. Vane looked from me to Wolfe. You staged that. It was your telephone, Briggs said. It was not. You knew the number. I did not know there was another telephone. Owen Pike spoke quietly. Any of us could have arranged a call in advance. That was true, and it was also the first intelligent remark he had made. Wolfe turned to him. At what time? Pike glanced at the clock. 4:20. The telephone rang at 4:23. A person could have been instructed to call during the interview. Or a recording device could have been attached to the line, Vane said. Briggs looked toward the hall. Or someone is already in the house. That possibility produced a better silence than any Wolfe had obtained by questioning. I stood. Remain? Here, Wolfe said. Someone may be upstairs. Saul is in the kitchen. Fritz is with him. Theodore is in the plant rooms. That leaves the basement, my room, the spare room, and the hall closets. Search them. I drew the automatic from my shoulder holster and started with the front room. The windows were locked. The curtains concealed nothing. The telephone wire ran along the baseboard and disappeared through the wall. In the hall, the coat closet was empty except for coats. I checked the dining room, kitchen, pantry, basement stairs, and rear entrance. Saul joined me without asking. Questions. Fritz remained by the kitchen telephone, looking offended that an intruder might enter the house near dinner. We searched the second floor. My room was undisturbed. The spare bedroom was empty. The bathroom window was locked. At the end of the corridor, near the linen cupboard, Saul crouched and pointed. A thin black wire emerged beneath the molding. It had been painted to match the wood. We followed it to a small metal box hidden behind the hallway radiator. Inside was a relay, a battery, and a narrow spool of recording wire connected to the front room telephone. The device had been planted earlier. I carried it downstairs on a towel to avoid smudging fingerprints. The 3 visitors were still seated. Wolfe inspected the box without touching it. "A timed mechanism?" he asked. Saul shook his head. "Remote trigger. Short range. Whoever started it was probably within a few hundred feet." "Across the street," I said. "Possibly. Fred Durkin was across the street." I telephoned the parked car from my desk. Fred answered. "See anyone leave a building in the last 5 minutes?" "A woman with a dog, 2 delivery boys, and a tall fellow in a brown coat." "Which way did the tall fellow go?" "East. He got into a cab." "Did you see his face?" "Side view. Thin nose, dark glasses. Follow him. The cab is gone. Then get the number." I already did. I hung up and told Wolfe. Vane said, "That proves the call had nothing to do with us." Wolfe looked at him. "It proves none of you spoke into the telephone at 4:23. It does not prove that none of you arranged the call." Briggs pointed at the device. "Who could have planted that?" "The man who entered yesterday." "As Walter Kells," I said. The hallway photograph had been a distraction. The messenger had not merely inspected the house. During the 15 seconds I left him alone, he had hidden the wire under the molding and placed the relay behind the radiator. Wolfe turned to Pike. "You supervised the installation of recording systems at Vane and Mercer Holdings, did you not?" Pike's face lost color. Vane answered for him. "Our accounting department uses dictation wire." "Mr. Pike?" The accountant moistened his lips. "I approved purchases." "Did Walter Kells know how to operate the equipment?" "Yes." "Did you, of course, Mr. Vane?" "I had no reason to." "Mr. Briggs?" Briggs shrugged. "I could turn one on." Wolfe rested his hands on the desk. "The call was prepared yesterday by the false messenger. It was designed to occur while the 3 of you were visibly present. Therefore, its purpose was not merely to frighten Archie. It was intended to give someone in this room an alibi." No one spoke, Wolfe continued. "A crude thinker would conclude that the caller could not be Mr. Vane, Mr. Briggs, or Mr. Pike because all 3 sat before me when the voice was heard. But the voice was recorded, and the call was triggered from outside. The performance proves only that its author understands machinery and anticipated this gathering." Pike's breath came shallowly. Vane stared at the recording box. Briggs looked from one partner to the other. Wolfe's eyes moved among them, but settled finally on Pike. "Mr. Pike, say the word thousands." Pike blinked. "What?" "Say it." "This is ridiculous." "Say it." Pike drew a breath. "Thousands." A faint whistle escaped between the first and second syllables. It was not as strong as Walter Kells's whistle, but it was formed in the same place. I had been listening for a copied voice. Wolfe had been listening for the man who taught the copy how to breathe. Chapter 7. The hidden instrument Owen Pike remained in the straight-back chair, but his expression had changed. Until that moment he had looked like an accountant enduring an unpleasant audit. Now he looked like a man who had discovered that the figures were beginning to add themselves. The faint whistle on the word thousands had not convicted him. A narrow passage of breath can be caused by teeth, nerves, or an unfortunate arrangement between the two. But Wolfe had not asked for the word by accident, and Pike knew it. Harold Vane broke the silence first. "You cannot accuse a man of murder because he whistles." Wolfe's gaze remained on Pike. "I have accused no one." "You have been pointing at him for half an hour." "Pointing is Archie's department." "I am listening." Samuel Briggs leaned forward. "Then listen to this. Pike controlled every private account in the company. If money was moved through false names, he either did it or permitted it." Pike turned on him. "You authorized the Mercer transfers." "I authorized legitimate transfers. You signed schedules you never read, because you prepared them." Vane struck the arm of his chair with his palm. "Both of you will stop." Wolfe sighed. "Mr. Vane, Your authority in this room is imaginary. That quieted him. I picked up the hidden telephone relay from the corner of Wolfe's desk. Saul had disconnected it, but the spool inside still held the warning voice. A set of contacts had closed when the transmitter received a coded pulse. Whoever sent that pulse had been close enough to reach the device, but the pulse itself might have come through another instrument. Saul had already left to examine the offices of Vane and Mercer Holdings. Fred Durkin was following the cab number from across the street. I had telephoned the exchange and received the usual refusal, followed by the usual cooperation after mentioning Inspector Kramer in a tone suggesting he was already on his way. The front room telephone rang again. All three visitors looked toward the hall. This time it was not a dead clerk threatening us. It was a supervisor from the telephone company, I answered in the office. Goodwin speaking. We checked the line condition you reported, the supervisor said. The call at 423 did not enter your number through the normal exchange. How did it enter? A leased commercial circuit was bridged onto your line. From where? We are still checking. Check faster. We traced the control signal to a private branch board on Broad Street. Vane and Mercer Holdings. I looked at Vane. He had heard enough from my side of the conversation to know that the ground beneath his chair had shifted. Which extension? I asked. 714. The circuit was connected to an automatic calling timer. The timer opened the line at 423 and transmitted a recorded message. Who occupies extension 714? One moment. Paper rustled. Owen Pike, Accounting Department. Pike's face became perfectly still. I thanked the supervisor, hung up, and reported the facts. Samuel Briggs turned slowly toward Pike. Your office. Pike's hands remained folded over the briefcase. Anyone could have entered it. Your extension, Briggs said. The office was not locked. Vane spoke sharply. It is always locked when Pike is absent. Pike looked at him. Then, you had a key. So did you. Enough, Wolfe said. Neither man seemed inclined to obey, so I moved beside Pike's chair and rested one hand on the back of it. He noticed. Wolfe asked, Mr. Pike, did you install an automatic telephone timer in your office? I did not. Did you know one was there? I did not. Do you possess the technical knowledge required to connect it? I know. Ordinary accounting equipment. I am not an engineer. The instrument was not sophisticated. A timer, a recorder, and a leased line. You approved the purchase of all three. For business use. Certainly. Murderers rarely order equipment under the heading criminal necessities. Pike's lips compressed. Harold Vane said, Pike prepared our recorded reports. He knew every circuit in the building. That is a lie, Pike replied. It is in the purchasing files. You signed the requests. I signed what you placed before me. Briggs gave a low grunt. That seems to be everyone's defense. The doorbell rang. I went to the hall and admitted Saul Panzer. Inspector Kramer and Sergeant Stebbins came in behind him. Kramer had apparently decided that refusing Wolfe's invitation was less satisfying than arriving without one. Saul carried a small black case. I found the timer, he said. Pike's office, behind a panel under the telephone board. It had been wiped, but the mounting screws were recently handled. Kramer took the case from him. You entered the office without a warrant? The building manager admitted me. After you told him what? That a murderer might be using his telephone system. Kramer glared, but he opened the case. Inside was a compact automatic timer, a second spool of wire, and a switching unit. The arrangement was simple. At the selected minute, the timer had dialed through the leased circuit, sent a coded pulse to the relay hidden in Wolfe's hallway, and played the recorded warning into the front room telephone. The three men had sat before Wolfe while Pike's empty office supplied an alibi for one of them. Kramer looked at Pike. Do you have a good explanation? My office was searched yesterday, Pike said. Goodwin saw two men burning papers. One of them was not Pike, I told Kramer. The other could have been wearing a delivery coat, a false name, or his grandmother's curtains. Did not get an introduction. Pike's eyes moved toward me. You are admitting you cannot identify them. I am admitting they were ugly. Wolfe ignored us. Saul. What else? Saul removed a folded sheet from his pocket. The timer was purchased 4 months ago by Hollis Commercial Records. Payment was authorized through a Vane and Mercer account. Hollis and Company, I said. The name used by the man who questioned Fritz. Saul nodded. Hollis Commercial Records has no employees and no office. Its mail goes to a box rented by Owen Pike. Pike rose. I pressed the chair back against his legs. Sit. You cannot keep me here, Kramer said. At present I can. Pike sat. Wolfe rang for Fritz. When Fritz entered, he carried a small notebook. His face showed that he would rather have been supervising dinner, but he had accepted that crime was again interfering with civilization. Wolfe said, Fritz, repeat the exact sentence used by the first caller regarding Thomas Reed. Fritz opened the notebook. After I told him no servant named Thomas Reed worked here, he said, I was informed that Thomas Reed worked there last winter. I looked at him. You did not include that before. I recalled it while preparing lunch and wrote it down. I informed Mr. Wolfe this afternoon. Wolfe nodded. Thank you. Remain here. Fritz stood near the office door. Wolfe regarded the 3 men in front of him. I shall ask each of you to repeat a harmless sentence. Mr. Vane say, Thomas Reed worked here last winter. Vane stared at him. This is foolish. Most harmless things are. Say it. Vane's irritation nearly choked him, but he obeyed. Thomas Reed worked here last winter. His pronunciation was firm and smooth. Wolfe turned to Briggs. Briggs repeated the sentence with his gravelly impatience, putting enough weight on Winter to make it sound like a personal enemy. Then Wolfe looked at Pike. Mr. Pike. The accountant did not speak. Repeat the sentence. Pike's pale fingers tightened on the briefcase handle. I refuse. Wolfe's brows rose slightly. Kramer said, It is not a crime to refuse one of his parlor tricks. Wolfe looked at him. Allow Mr. Pike to finish. Pike's eyes had gone to Fritz. I will not repeat a sentence and have you claim it matches a telephone call, he said. I never told that cook Thomas Reed worked here last winter. Silence settled over the office. It was a fine silence, complete and balanced. Pike heard his own words in it. His mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. Wolfe leaned back. I had not explained why I selected the sentence. Pike swallowed. You did not need to. On the contrary, Mr. Vane and Mr. Briggs did not know it had been spoken to Fritz. Inspector Kramer did not know. Archie learned it only a moment ago. The exact wording was never mentioned outside this house. Pike said, Fritz must have told someone. Fritz's expression became cold. I told Mr. Wolfe. Perhaps Goodwin mentioned it on the telephone. I did not know it, I said. Pike looked toward Kramer. This proves nothing. Kells may have told me what he intended to say. Kells was already dead, Wolfe replied. Then whoever made the call told me. Who made it? Pike stopped. Wolfe continued quietly. You objected not to the sentence, but to the accusation you expected would follow it. You knew the words because you composed them. That is an assumption. It is a deduction supported by your office timer, your leased circuit, your false company, and your knowledge of the morning inquiry. Vane rose halfway from his chair. You used my company to stage these calls? Pike turned toward him. Sit down, Harold. It was the first time he had spoken to Vane without deference. Vane sat, not because Pike had commanded it, but because the change in the accountant's voice disturbed him. The timid precision was gone. Pike's words were now quick and hard. Wolfe heard it too. Your natural voice, he said. At last, Pike gave him a thin smile. You think you have solved it. I think you are exposed. That is different. Kramer stepped closer. Where is Edward Marsh? Pike looked at him with contempt. I do not know. Where is Harold Vane's driver? I do not know. Who killed Dennis Crowell and Walter Kells? I do not know. Wolfe lifted one finger. Inspector, those questions are premature. Mr. Pike's guilt in the telephone deception does not alone establish that he committed both murders. Kramer rounded on him. His equipment made the call. Indeed. He knew the private sentence. Indeed. He had access to the company accounts. Indeed. Then what are you waiting for? The truth. Kramer made a sound. That did not flatter the truth. Wolfe turned to Pike. You imitated Walter Kells poorly because precision was unnecessary. Archie had heard Kells speak only briefly. The wire recording supplied the frightened pauses, while the whistle and deliberate pronunciation completed the suggestion. But the first inquiry was made in your own voice, altered only slightly. Pike said nothing. You asked about Archie's movements and the layout of this house because you needed to plant the relay. The false Walter Kells entered the hallway. Yesterday afternoon and installed it. That man was not you. Archie saw him while you were at the company office in the presence of several clerks. Pike's expression shifted, only a fraction, but Wolfe caught it. So you had an accomplice, Wolfe said. You are inventing one because your case is incomplete. My case is incomplete because 2 murders are not yet arranged in their proper order. Wolfe picked up the copied account sheet. Walter Kells discovered that money had been routed through the name Thomas Reed. Dennis Crowell possessed the original proof. Harold Vane was accused of receiving the funds. Yet the recording from the green box warned that the record named the wrong man. Briggs said, the wrong man was Vane. Vane turned on him. You have wanted that to be true from the beginning. Wolfe ignored them. The payments did not end in Mr. Vane's personal account. They passed through it. Mr. Pike controlled the adjustment ledgers and could redirect the money afterward. Pike's face remained still, but his breathing had shortened. Wolfe continued. The fraud began 6 years ago, when Thomas Reed disappeared from the Mercer household. You required a dead or vanished man whose name could support false wages, consulting fees, and warehouse payments. Reed was ideal. I did not work for Mercer 6 years ago. You did, under another name. Pike's eyes flashed. I reached for the old household photograph. Wolfe said, Archie, the service list. I placed it before him. Near the bottom, beneath Thomas Reed, was another entry I had read without remembering. Samuel Briggs, junior bookkeeper attached to household office. I looked at the man in the yellow chair. Samuel Briggs stared at the paper. Vane said, What is that? Wolfe's voice remained quiet. Mr. Briggs was employed by Andrew Mercer 6 years ago. He later became your partner, yet he denied knowing the details of the green box inquiry. Briggs rose. This time I did not move toward him. Kramer did. Wolfe continued. The name Thomas Reed worked here last winter was bait for Mr. Pike, but the old record supplies a second fact. Owen Pike could not have begun the fraud 6 years ago. Samuel Briggs could. Pike turned toward Briggs. The look between them lasted only a second. It was enough. Briggs moved first. His hand went inside his coat. Kramer seized his wrist. Stebbins caught his shoulder, and the 3 of them struck the edge of the yellow chair hard enough to overturn it. A small revolver fell onto the rug. Pike sprang toward the office door. Fritz stepped into his path. Pike stopped. Fritz was unarmed, but something in his face suggested that passing him would be harder than expected. Saul came from the hall and took Pike's arm. Within 10 seconds, both men were under control. Kramer picked up the revolver. Wolfe looked offended by the disorder. Return the chair to its place. Stebbins stared at him. The chair, Wolfe repeated. I set it upright. Samuel Briggs's gravelly voice was gone. Pike arranged the calls. Pike laughed once. You helped conceal the fraud. You used me, Briggs replied. You said Crowell would sell us out. Kramer looked from one to the other. Wolfe closed his eyes. Excellent, he murmured. Fear has finally made them conversational. But the case was not yet complete. Briggs had revealed that Pike arranged the calls. Pike had accused Briggs of helping conceal the fraud. Neither had explained Dennis Crowell's locked study, the false appearance in Vane's hallway, or the identity of the man who had worn a dead clerk's face. Wolfe opened his eyes and looked at Kramer. Bring everyone connected with the Mercer household here tomorrow evening. Mrs. Mercer, Philip Mercer, Ruth Vale, Dr. Keene, Mr. Vane, and these 2 men, Kramer said. You already have them. I have fragments. Tomorrow I shall assemble them. And the murderer? Wolfe glanced at Pike and Briggs. One of these men constructed the voice. One profited from the false accounts. But the person who struck Dennis Crowell believed the green box contained something more dangerous than financial proof. He looked at the recording instrument on his desk. The telephone trick concealed 2 crimes, Inspector, but it also concealed a third voice. Tomorrow we shall hear it. Chapter 8. The Voice, identified at 9. The following evening, Nero Wolfe's office contained enough suspicion to make the air seem overused. Wolfe sat behind his desk with a bottle of beer before him and the financial records arranged at his right hand. I occupied my usual chair with my notebook open. Inspector Kramer stood near the globe, refusing a seat because standing made him feel less like a guest. Sergeant Stebbins guarded the door. Harold Vane had the red leather chair. Samuel Briggs and Owen Pike sat apart under police supervision. Philip Mercer was beside the bookshelves, stiff and resentful. His cousin Ruth Vale sat near him, pale but composed. Dr. Amos Keene had chosen a chair close to the door. Evelyn Mercer, wrapped in grey silk and family dignity, watched everyone as though murder were another discourtesy committed against her household. Saul Panzer stood in the hall. Fritz remained in the kitchen, where dinner had been delayed by Wolfe's command and disapproved of by every civilized instinct in the house. Wolfe surveyed the gathering. "We are concerned with 2 murders," he began. "Walter Kells was killed in a rented room early Tuesday morning. Dennis Crowell was killed several hours later in the Mercer study. Between those deaths and after them, telephone calls were made in the voice of Mr. Kells." Kramer said, "We know that." "You know fragments, Inspector. You have confused possession of fragments with possession of the design." Kramer's lips tightened, but he let Wolfe continue. Mr. Kells was a timid clerk with access to accounts, maintained by Vane and Mercer Holdings. He discovered that company funds were being diverted through false contracts, dead employees, and the name of Thomas Reed, a former servant in the Mercer household. Philip Mercer shifted in his chair. Wolfe looked at him. "Mr. Reed did not steal from your father. He discovered that his name was being used in false accounts." Andrew Mercer dismissed him and allowed an accusation of theft to stand because exposure would have damaged the company. Evelyn Mercer spoke coldly. "My husband would not have done such a thing." "He did, madam. The recording wire from the green box establishes it." Kramer removed a small spool from his pocket and placed it on the desk. Wolfe nodded toward it. 6 years ago, Andrew Mercer recorded a quarrel with Dennis Crowell. Crowell accused him of concealing withdrawals under Reed's name. Mercer replied that Reed was dead and therefore harmless, but Reed was not dead. He fled after being threatened and later lived under the name Edward Marsh. Ruth Vale drew a breath. Edward Marsh was Thomas Reed. "Yes." Philip stared at Wolfe. "Then Marsh's testimony against me was revenge." "Partly. It was also evidence. Mr. Marsh had retained copies of early shipping accounts. He intended to prove that the false contracts continued after your father's death." "Where is he?" Kramer asked. "Alive. Saul located him this afternoon in a private hospital in New Jersey. He was drugged and abandoned there under another name." Kramer turned toward Saul in the hall. "Why was I not told?" Saul replied, "You are being told now." Kramer made a sound in his throat. Wolfe continued, "Mr. Marsh did not make any of the calls to this house." Archie associated the frightened voice with him because both Marsh and Kells spoke cautiously. That resemblance was useful to the criminal. It widened the field and strengthened the confusion. Owen Pike sat motionless. His face had the grey, sealed look of old paper. Wolfe lifted Walter Kells's typed note. Kells discovered 2 related crimes. Harold Vane had falsified contracts and concealed withdrawals from his partner. Owen Pike, who controlled the accounting system, had then diverted part of those stolen funds into accounts of his own. Vane leaned forward. "That is false." Wolfe looked at him. "Your protest is limited. You object to Mr. Pike's theft from you, not to your theft from Mr. Briggs. Samuel Briggs gave Vane a hard glance. Vane's face darkened. Those were authorized transfers. Then you may explain them to a jury. Your fraud is not the central question tonight. Wolfe turned his attention to Pike. Mr. Kells copied the records. He also learned that Dennis Crowell possessed the old recording that connected the modern fraud to the original use of Thomas Reed's name. Kells intended to deliver both forms of proof to me. Pike spoke quietly. You cannot prove that. I can. The envelope Kells prepared bore his fingerprints beneath the wax seal. The messenger who brought it here was not Kells, but the contents were assembled by him. I glanced at Kramer. That had been one of the laboratory results delivered that afternoon, Wolfe continued. Mr. Pike discovered what Kells had done. He persuaded the clerk to meet him in a rented room under the pretense of arranging protection. There he restrained him, questioned him, and killed him with a blow behind the ear. Pike's mouth moved. Why would I leave the papers to be delivered? You did not know where all the copies were. You needed to learn whether Kells had already sent them to me. His death alone would not answer that. Wolfe placed a portable wire spool beside the one from the green box. You possessed old recordings of Kells dictating letters. He had recorded routine correspondence because his hearing difficulty made direct dictation troublesome. His voice, including its slow pronunciation and occasional whistle, existed on several office spools. I said, Pike cut words and phrases from those recordings. Precisely. He also forced Kells before killing him to record several additional sentences. That accounts for the bruises on Kells's wrists and for the unused phrases found on the spool. Kramer frowned. The voice on the call sounded like a conversation. It was an arrangement, not a conversation. Archie supplied the questions. Pike selected recorded answers that appeared to fit them. When Archie asked who intended murder, the recording answered, someone in this house. When he asked what had been found, Pike played the original record. The pauses were knots. Fear. They were the intervals required to find and transmit the next section. Pike looked at me. You heard breathing. I heard yours, I said. The dead man supplied the words. You supplied the lungs. Wolfe inclined his head. The first. Calls had several purposes. They directed attention toward Thomas Reed and the old Mercer inquiry. They tested who answered each telephone in this house. They also prepared Archie to recognize the voice of Walter Kells. Ruth Vale said, Why would Pike want Kells recognized if Kells was dead? Because a living fugitive may be blamed, Wolfe replied. A dead victim cannot. He picked up the photograph of our front hallway. Pike required us to believe that Kells remained alive after the time of his murder. An accomplice resembling Kells delivered the envelope, planted a telephone relay in the hallway, and later appeared briefly at the Vane offices where Archie saw him. Kramer looked at Samuel Briggs. The accomplice? Briggs scowled. I did not wear a disguise. Indeed you did not, Wolfe said. The man was Peter Larkin, also known under several other names. He was the armed intruder Archie captured. Under questioning this afternoon, he admitted that Pike hired him to deliver the envelope, install the relay, and appear in the office hallway wearing Kells's coat, spectacles, and dental plate. I said, The hand that pulled him through. The service door belonged to one of the men burning the account papers. Larkin staged his own removal. I was chasing both halves of a performance. Pike's eyes flicked toward the door. Stebbins moved a step closer. Wolfe went on. The second warning call occurred while Mr. Pike sat in this office. It was generated by the automatic timer concealed in his Broad Street office and transmitted through the relay Larkin had planted here. Its purpose was to establish that Pike could not be the caller. Kramer said it did the opposite, because the mechanism was found. Criminal ingenuity is admired chiefly by criminals. Harold, Vane pointed at Pike. Then he killed Crowell too. Wolfe looked at him. You are eager to have all guilt placed in one container. That is understandable, since you hope your own fraud may spill out unnoticed. Vane lowered his hand. Dennis Crowell had discovered that both Vane and Pike were stealing from the company. He attempted to sell his silence. He also recovered the green box and its recording wire from Andrew Mercer's old safe. Philip Mercer said, "Crowell was in my house as my advisor. He was in your house as a blackmailer." Wolfe folded his hands over his middle. Pike went to the Mercer residence Tuesday morning. He was admitted through the service entrance, under the name Hollis, supposedly to inspect a recording instrument. Crowell received him in the upstairs study because Pike claimed he could identify what was on the wire. Dr. Keene spoke. Everyone was downstairs. Pike could not have left the room after killing him. The door was locked from within. The room was never locked against the murderer, Wolfe said. It was locked against the hallway. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Explain. The Mercer study has a narrow service door concealed behind a bookcase. It was used decades ago by servants tending the fireplace. It opens into a linen passage and was covered during renovations, but not sealed. Ruth Vale stared at him. There is no second door. There is. Archie found it this afternoon after examining the old architectural plans. The bookcase swings outward when pressure is applied to a brass catch beneath the third shelf. ID. Had spent an hour in the Mercer study with Saul and 2 reluctant policemen. The hidden passage was dusty but usable. A thread from Pike's brown coat had been caught on a splinter inside it. Wolfe continued. Pike entered by the ordinary door, argued with Crowell, and struck him with the bronze bookend. He then placed the telephone receiver in Crowell's hand and wrote my number and the words "green box" on the blotter. Kramer said, "The study door key was in Crowell's pocket." Pike locked the ordinary door from inside, returned the key to Crowell's pocket, and departed through the concealed passage. The fallen clock and the receiver were staged to suggest that Crowell had been killed during his call to Archie. Philip said, "But the call came from our switchboard." Yes. Pike connected his portable recorder to an unused extension in the linen passage. He made the call after killing Crowell, then entered the study through the hidden door, arranged the body, and departed unseen. Kramer picked up his notebook. The operator said the call originated from the study extension. The switchboard showed the study line because Pike bridged the passage extension onto it. The telephone company confirmed that this afternoon. Pike finally smiled, though there was little pleasure in it. "You have built an elegant story." Wolfe's brows rose. "It is inelegant. It contains too much machinery. Where is your proof that I struck either man?" "The proof is cumulative. The timer was in your office. The false Hollis company belonged to you. The account transfers ended. In your private holdings, Larkin identifies you. Your coat fiber was found in the concealed passage. Walter Kells's blood was found inside the trunk of your automobile." Pike's smile vanished. Kramer said, "We received that laboratory report 20 minutes ago." Wolfe looked at Pike. "You cleaned the trunk, but not the underside of the spare wheel cover." Pike's breathing had become audible. Wolfe leaned back. "Yet one fact identified you before any of those reports arrived. When I asked you to repeat the sentence, 'Thomas Reed worked here last winter,' you refused and declared that you had never spoken those words to Fritz." Pike said nothing. "That exact sentence had not been mentioned in your presence. You knew it because you had recorded it for the first morning inquiry. Your refusal was not caution. It was recognition." Samuel Briggs said, "He used me." Wolfe turned to him. "You made yourself useful. You concealed Vane's fraud because exposing it would have damaged the company and your own investment. You also knew Kells was copying records and failed to protect him. Those matters will interest the district attorney, but you did not murder him." Briggs's face showed relief, followed quickly by the realization that relief had limits. Vane said, "Pike stole from me." "You stole first," Wolfe replied. "He merely found theft contagious." Evelyn Mercer looked toward the spool on the desk. "And the green box?" "It was not empty 6 years ago," Wolfe said. "Andrew Mercer lied when he claimed it was. The recording remained inside until Dennis Crowell removed it and hid it among the old household effects. He recovered it recently and attempted to profit from it." Ruth Vale asked, "Why did the warning say the record named the wrong man?" because the accounts named Thomas Reed as the recipient of stolen funds. Reed received nothing. His name concealed the true recipients, first Vane, then Pike. The record did not merely accuse the wrong man. It accused a man who had already been made to disappear. Kramer moved toward Owen Pike. "Stand up." Pike did not move. Stebbins took his arm and raised him from the chair. Pike looked at Wolfe. His careful manner had returned, but the precision was breaking at the edges. "You never met Kells," he said. Wolfe regarded him. "I met his murderer. You claim you identified a speaker who was dead before the call. Your error lies in the word speaker. Walter Kells did not speak to Archie on Tuesday morning. You spoke with his pauses, his fear, and his stolen syllables." Pike's lips parted, but Wolfe continued. "A voice is not a man. It is evidence of breath, habit, memory, and circumstance. You possess the sound, but not the life that had produced it. That distinction betrayed you." Kramer nodded to Stebbins, and they led Pike toward the hall. At the doorway, Pike stopped. "Vane would have escaped," he said. "Kells would have exposed me and let Vane bargain his way free." Wolfe's expression did not change. "So you killed a clerk, killed a blackmailer, and placed the voice of one dead man into the hand of another. Your complaint about fairness is unpersuasive." Pike was taken out. Kramer gathered the recording spools and financial papers. Before leaving, he looked at Wolfe. "You could have told me about the hidden passage sooner. I could have told you many things sooner. You would then have known them before understanding them." Kramer put on his hat and departed with Stebbins, Briggs, and Vane. The Mercer family followed under instructions to remain available. Dr. Keene left without saying goodbye. When the front door finally closed, I returned to the office. Wolfe was looking at the clock. "You have 20 minutes. Before dinner," I said. 19. "You identified the caller without meeting him, except the caller was Pike operating Kells's recording." "Correct. So the voice was Kells, the speaker was Pike, and the breathing belonged to whoever happened to be near the machine. You are struggling with a simple distinction. I am admiring it. Do so silently." Fritz entered. "Dinner is ready," he announced. Wolfe rose with more enthusiasm than he had shown during the arrest. As we crossed the hall, I asked, "What is for dinner?" "Roast duck with chestnuts," Fritz said. That was a better ending than handcuffs. But before following Wolfe into the dining room, I looked back at the office telephone. For 2 days, a dead man had whispered through it, frightened, careful, and convincing. The voice had carried warnings, lies, and fragments of truth. It had named no murderer because it had possessed no will of its own. Owen Pike had believed that by stealing Walter Kells's voice, he could make the dead clerk his accomplice. He had forgotten that Nero Wolfe listened not only to what a man said, but to who had chosen the words.